Hey everyone, welcome to another lesson of ASP .NET from scratch. My name is Jeremy McPeak, and today we'll look at master pages and user controls. These are features of ASP .NET that can be used in both web forms and MVC applications. Before getting started though, I want to point out that I'm no longer using Visual Web Developer Express 2008. April saw the release of .NET 4.0 along with Visual Studio 2010, so I took the opportunity to get Windows 7 loaded on a virtual machine and install Visual Web Developer Express 2010. The Express editions are still free, so head over to Microsoft.com/Express to get the latest Express versions of Visual Studio. Alright, so let's get started with master pages. You can think of a master page as a template. It allows you to use the same markup across multiple pages in your web app so that they have a consistent look and feel. A master page allows us to define placeholders for where our actual content is displayed, and we create what are called content pages to supply that content. So what actually happens is a user requests a content page, it merges with the master page, and the resulting page made up of our template and content is sent back to the browser. So let's create a new web application project. I'll go to New and then New Project, and I'll select ASP.NET Web Application. I'll call this Master Page and User Controls. And I'll click OK. Now Visual Studio generates projects based on a template, and the new web application template generates a master page and two content pages. Master pages have an extension of .master, so they're very easy to spot within Solution Explorer. But the content pages have an extension of ASPX, so really the only way to determine if an ASPX file is a content page is to actually open it up and look at the markup. But we want to start from scratch, so let's go ahead and let's delete these three files and we'll create them on our own. So first we're going to add a master page. We'll right click on our project, we'll go to Add and then New Item, and we'll see master page here in about the middle of the list here. We can name it whatever we want to. I'm going to leave this as Site 1 and I'll click Add. And it looks almost exactly like any other ASPX page. There's two main differences though. The first is the master declaration at the top. This tells the .NET runtime that this is a master page. The second difference is this control called a content placeholder. This is the region of that's going to have some type of content that a content page is going to supply. This has an ID of head, so whenever we create a content page, we're going to have another control called a content control, and it's going to reference this ID here. So we have one in the head of the page, which is called head, and then we have one in the body that is inside of a div element. It has an ID of content placeholder 1. We'll change this just to be a little bit easier to remember, and we'll just call this content. If we wanted to, we could add some default content inside of these placeholders so that there would always be content within them. I'll go ahead and do that here. I'll just put default content. And just so that you can see what a master page actually does, let's add an H1 element, and we are outside of the content placeholder, so this is going to be considered within the template, and we'll put beginning of content, and we'll put another H1 after this div element, and we'll put end of content. So whenever we write a content page that uses this master page, we are going to see an H1 element with the text beginning of content. If we looked at the source, we would see a div element, then we would see the content that we supplied to it, and then outside of the div element we would see another H1 element that says end of content. We can also add ASP.NET controls because this is still an ASPX page, or at least it will be whenever it's merged with our content page. So I'm going to add an ASP literal control. I'm going to give it an ID of LTL text. I'll set the run at server attribute, and that will be done. Also, something about the content placeholders, I'm sure you already saw that there needs to be a run at attribute with these two because these are ASP.NET controls. Alright, so now that we have a master page, let's create a content page that uses this master page. So we'll go back, right click on our project, we'll go to Add, and then New Item. And we will choose a web form using a master page. And we are going to name this Default. And then we will be asked what master page we want to use. Right now we only have the one, site1.master, so we'll select that. We'll click OK. Now, a content page has very little extra markup. As you can see here, there are two content controls. They have their own IDs, but they have a content placeholder ID, which references the content placeholder from the master page. Visual Studio will automatically generate a content page based upon the master page. So we have a content placeholder or a content control that adds content to the content placeholder with an ID of head and one with the ID of content. So I'm going to go ahead and hit F5 so that this will compile and run. We can see here that we're not really seeing a lot. We have the H1 elements from our master page, the beginning of content and the end of content, but we're not seeing anything in between. If we looked at the source, which popped up underneath, we can see that we have our H1 element here. We have the div element that is outside of the content placeholder with an ID of content inside of the body of our page, and then we have the H1 element at the end of our content. So we're not seeing any content here, and that's because our content page called default.aspx has a content control for the content placeholder with an ID of content. And since there's nothing here, the data that is here is being passed on to the master page, and it's overriding this default content that we have within our content placeholder. So if we were to remove this content control and save it, we'll go back and refresh the page, and we can see that it's listed here. So the default content is shown only when the content page does not have a content control for this placeholder. Let's re-add that back because we want to showcase some of the features here, and let's just add our own content, and we'll add some content to the placeholder within the head. Since this is in the head here, I'll just add in a style element, and we'll set the background color of the body to something noticeable gray. And we can also add a script element to add some JavaScript, and this will just alert a simple message. We can go back, hit refresh, our JavaScript is executing, and our CSS is also being pulled in. If we look at the source, again we can see that underneath the title element here within the head, which is where our content placeholder is, right after the title element, we can see that our style element and our script element is being put in here. If we look down within the body of the page, we can see that here is some content, which is what we added within our content control here. Now if you notice, on our browser we're just getting the URL as the title of this page here. Instead, if we wanted to add our own title, we could use this title attribute within the page declaration at the top. So we can change this to sample content page, refresh the browser, and then the title of the HTML page has changed. If we look at the source, then we can see that there is some text within the title element. So we can do that here within our content page, or we can do that in the code behind. Now, one thing, we're not just limited to just text and HTML. We can add our own ASP.NET controls if we wanted to. In fact, I'm going to use a repeater control. I'm going to give it an ID of RPT names, and I'm only going to set the template, the item template. Every item is going to be in a paragraph so that we can easily tell the different items from each other, and we just need to get the data item. Oops, get data item. Now, I don't have a database installed on this machine yet, so what I have to simulate a data store is a class. I will add this. It is within the namespace data. The class name is data store. It is a static class, and it has just one method that returns an enumerable object containing names here. So it's really nothing special, but it can be enumerated and it can be added as a data source to our repeater control. So we'll go to our code behind. We'll go to default.aspx.cs. This content page does have a code behind file, and we will get the RPT names, which is our repeater. We'll set the data source as data store, get names, and then we'll call the data bind method. And I'll go back and get rid of at least the JavaScript so that we're not greeted with that alert every time we run this. So I will hit F5, which will compile and then run it for us. And we can see that our repeater is working. It is pulling data from our data source and it is enumerating over it. Let's look at our source code here, and we can see that we have individual P elements with names inside of them. So we can use really anything that we want to in a content page. It is an ASPX page. The only difference is it has no markup or controls for the look and feel of our website. It just simply provides content. Now, from our content page, we can access our master page. There is a master property that we can use to access our master page. And if you remember, within our site1.master file, we do have an ASP literal control here. But really, we wouldn't want to access that from a content page, because if we wanted to supply content, we would just use another content placeholder, and our content page would have a content control to supply some information to that content placeholder. But there are some times when that's just not the best way to approach it, and we do want to access a control. How we need to do that is we need to go to the designer.cs of our master page, because all of the controls by default are giving a protected accessibility level. And here is our LTL text, and we can just change that to public. Now, since we have a master property here, what we really want to do is we want to cast it as a site1, which is the name of our master pages class. So this class site1 has a property called LTL text. So we need to cast our master page as a site1 object, which we're doing here, and then we can access LTL text, and then we can give this some text. Oops, sorry, I forgot the .text. and I hit F5 to compile and run, and then we can see that the literal control from our master page is being supplied some text to display here. But again, in most cases, if you want to do something like this, you will want to add another content placeholder, and that content page will supply content for that placeholder. If you are going to use a control within your master page, then it's usually going to be for use within the code behind of the master page. And as I said earlier, I'm going to go ahead and change this back to protected. As I said earlier, a master page looks a lot like just a regular ASPX page, and the only difference was the master declaration and the content placeholders. So other than that, it's still an ASPX page. We can still access any control within the master page from our code behind, and we can set the text. We'll just do something simple. And as this builds, then we can see that our master page is supplying text to this literal control. So there's really nothing lost with using master pages. You actually gain from it because it's a template. You're able to use this same master page across multiple files. In fact, let's create another one. We'll go to Add and then New Item. We'll select Web Form using a master page. And we'll set it as Site 1 Master. I didn't name this anything. I named it what it gave me, which is Web Form 1. So let's go back first to our default.aspx. Let's add a link before the repeater. And we'll just call web form ASPX. And then let's add some content here. And let's give this, of course, this kind of defeats the purpose of having a master page, but we're going to set another style sheet, and we're going to give it a different background color. We'll go with yellow. So as I hit F5 to run this, again, this really is only for example purposes, just so that you can see how this works. We need to go to default.aspx. We can see that we have a link here to go to web form 1. If we click it, it'll take us to web form 1, and we have some new content within our content placeholder within the body of the page, and of course the content within the head has changed to have a background of yellow. Alright, so that you can see how all of this works together, and because this is kind of a bad example just because nothing looks the same, I'm going to delete these files that we created. And I will add back in what was originally created with this project. And we want those three, these three, and these three. And let's go ahead and look at the site.master. This is the master page. It has a lot of markup in it. Most of this is just for look and feel. There is a content placeholder in the head called head content. We can see that there are some controls in use here. The login view control, which is linked to the membership features of ASP.NET for user authentication and things such as that. There is a menu as well. There's also another content placeholder called main content, so the main content is going to go there. Let's look at the default.aspx content page. Nothing is added to the header content, but there is some stuff in the body content. The same is true for the about page. Nothing in the header, but some in the body. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to hit F5 to compile this and run it. And we can see here, there we go, we have a web page that just really doesn't look spectacular, but we do have a menu up top here. We have a home and an about. Right now we are at home, but if we click on about, everything's going to maintain the same look and feel. The content did change here, and if we go back to home, it's the same thing. And that is master pages. Now I had originally planned to get to user controls in this lesson, but we are running a little late, and I think we're at about the 20-minute mark or a little bit after. So we'll hold off on user controls until the next lesson, which will be in a couple of weeks. So I'd like to thank you for watching this lesson, and I hope you learned something. We'll see you next time.